My name is Graham Faulkner. I am 57 years old, and I have spent 34 of those years as a licensed master electrician in the province of Ontario. I have wired hospitals, schools, arenas, 2 federal buildings, and more residential subdivisions than I can count from memory. I tell you this not because it matters to the story, but because it matters to how I think. In my trade, everything comes down to connections. Whether current flows or doesn't, whether something is grounded properly or waiting to arc, you learn to read a system by what's carrying load and what's been left exposed. And if you're paying attention, you can usually see the fault before the fire. I saw the fault in my son's life 2 full years before the fire, and I did nothing. Not because I didn't care. Because I had spent 29 years learning to give my son room, to trust the process, to believe he'd find his way back to the wire, if I just kept the panel open. That strategy had worked exactly twice. The third time, it cost my wife her dignity in front of 300 people at the Delta Hotel in Barrie, Ontario. And it cost my son something I'm not sure he's finished paying for. Before I tell you what happened, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment with your city and your local time. It means more than you think. Now let me take you back to where this started. I met my wife Janet in the spring of 1993 at a community fundraiser for the Aurelia Hospital. She was running the silent auction table. I bid $60 on a set of hand-turned salad bowls. I didn't need because she had a laugh that carried across the hall, and I needed a reason to walk back to that table 4 more times. We married in '95. She spent 26 years as a school librarian at a public elementary near our house in Oro-Medonte, a township just north of Barrie. She retired 3 years ago. She still volunteers at the local branch on Thursdays, still keeps a reading list on the fridge, still tears up at the ends of books she's read before, because she says knowing the ending doesn't change the feeling. She is the kindest person I have ever met in my life, and I include my own mother in that, who was plenty kind herself. Janet has never raised her voice at a dinner table. She has never spoken ill of anyone to their face or behind their back. She once drove 45 minutes in a February storm to bring soup to a woman from church she barely knew, because she'd heard the woman's husband had left and nobody was checking in. Our son Kyle is 30 years old. He studied urban planning at the University of Waterloo, graduated near the top of his class, and started working at a mid-sized development consulting firm in Barrie before branching out on his own 18 months ago. He's sharp, ambitious, focused. When he was 22, he came home from his first real job site and called me from the driveway because he wanted to tell me about a zoning problem before his supervisor even noticed it. He was so excited, his voice cracked. I sat on the front step and listened to every word. I helped him when he went out on his own, not with cash. Kyle never asked for money, and I wouldn't have offered it that way. But I opened my contacts. 34 years in commercial electrical work in central Ontario means you know people. General contractors, developers, municipal planners, building inspectors, property managers. I made introductions quietly. I didn't attach my name to them. I just pointed Kyle toward doors and trusted him to walk through on his own merit. What I didn't understand until much later was that Kyle had stopped seeing those introductions as help. He'd started seeing them as background noise, something that had always been there, the way hydro is always there when you flip the switch. He never thought about who ran the wire. Kyle brought Megan Holloway home for the first time on a Thanksgiving weekend, about 2.5 years before the wedding. She arrived in a white SUV that probably cost more than my truck and my trailer combined. She was 27, slim, dark hair pulled back, and she walked through our front door the way someone walks through an open house they're evaluating, but aren't sure they'd buy. Janet had been cooking since 6 that morning. Turkey, mashed potatoes, her cranberry sauce with the orange zest she's been making since before Kyle was born, butter tarts from scratch. The whole house smelled like November. When Megan came through the kitchen, Janet wiped her hands on her apron and opened her arms the way she does. Warm, immediate, no ceremony. Megan leaned sideways slightly, offered a brief touch on Janet's shoulder, and pulled back. She glanced around the kitchen, at the ceramic rooster on the counter that Janet's mother had given her, at the mismatched oven mitts, at the wallpaper we'd been meaning to replace for 6 years. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. The appraisal was in her eyes. At dinner, Kyle talked about his plans for the firm. Megan listened, added a few things, asked me one question about commercial permits. It was a good question, actually. Specific, practical. She wasn't unintelligent. That was never the issue. After dessert, Janet asked Megan about her family. Megan's father ran a commercial real estate brokerage in Newmarket. Her mother sat on the board of a private school in Aurora. They had a cottage on Lake Rosso, the Muskoka kind, with the boathouse and the stone fireplace, that costs more than most people's primary residence. When Janet mentioned our place, a winterized cottage on a modest lake near Gravenhurst that we'd bought in 2004 and fixed up ourselves over 10 summers, Megan smiled and said, "Oh, that's sweet. Like a little getaway." Janet said, "It's our favorite place on earth." Megan reached for the butter tarts. "These are really good, Mrs. Faulkner. Do you make them from a mix?" "From scratch," Janet said. "My mother's recipe. That's so quaint." It was the word quaint that stayed with me. Not rude, exactly. Not a word you could confront. But loaded the way a wire looks fine on the outside and tests hot when you put a meter on it. Later that night, after they'd gone, Janet was washing the good china by hand the way she always does. I stood beside her drying. "She's very polished," Janet said carefully. "She is. Kyle seems happy." "He does." A pause then, very quietly. "Do you think she likes us, Graham?" I didn't answer right away. I set the plate down on the counter and looked at my wife, standing at the sink in her apron with her hands in soapy water, worried that she wasn't enough for a 27-year-old woman who had been in our home for 4 hours. "It doesn't matter if she likes us," I said. "What matters is how she treats you." Janet gave me a look that said she'd heard me but wasn't sure I was right. My sister Maureen called the next morning. She hadn't been at Thanksgiving. She lives out in Kelowna now with her husband, but Kyle had posted photos. Maureen had zoomed in on one of them, a group shot at the table where Megan was looking at her phone. "Graham, who is this girl? Her name's Megan. She's sharp. Kyle's serious about her. Is she serious about him or about what he's building?" "Maureen, I'm asking, you're reaching." She let it go. She shouldn't have, and neither should I. That was mistake number 1. Over the next 18 months, the pattern established itself the way frost gets into a foundation wall. Not all at once. Slowly, through the smallest cracks, and by the time you notice the damage, the structure's already compromised. Megan stopped addressing Janet directly. Everything went through Kyle. "Tell your mom we can't make Sunday dinner. Let your parents know we'll be an hour late. Ask your mother not to bring food when she visits. It's just a lot, you know." Kyle became the relay, carrying messages between 2 points that Megan had decided shouldn't touch. Janet's birthday dinner in July, Megan confirmed that morning, then canceled 40 minutes before. Said something came up with a client. Christmas Eve, Megan spent most of the evening on her phone in the living room while Janet served coffee and squares to everyone else. When Janet tried to tell a story about Kyle's first day of school, the one where he insisted on wearing his father's hard hat to kindergarten, Megan stood up mid-sentence, walked to the kitchen, and came back scrolling through her messages. Janet trailed off and never finished the story. I watched my wife shrink by degrees. Not physically. Janet is 5'6" and has never lost an inch. But something inside her began to compress. She started second-guessing everything. Should I call Kyle, or will Megan think I'm being pushy? Should I bring the butter tarts, or does that seem like I'm trying too hard? Is it okay if I text him on his birthday, or should I wait until he texts me? My wife was asking permission to love her own son. That was the thing I couldn't forgive. Not what Megan eventually did to Janet in public. What she did to Janet's confidence in private, day by day, dinner by dinner, canceled plan by canceled plan, until the woman who once drove 45 minutes in a blizzard to bring soup to a near stranger was afraid to call her own child without an appointment. When Kyle called to tell us they were engaged, Janet cried, and she started planning an engagement dinner at the house. I stood on the back deck in the cold and looked at the yard for a long time. 2 days later, I got a call from my old friend Hank Beaulieu. Hank and I had apprenticed together at the same shop in 1991. He went into project management, then development. His firm, Beaulieu and Associates, was now one of the larger regional developers in Simcoe County. We'd stayed close across 33 years, the way men stay close who don't talk often but talk honestly when they do. "Heard about the engagement," Hank said. "You sound quiet. Just thinking. About what?" "Whether I've been patient or just passive. I keep telling myself they're different things." Hank didn't say anything for a beat. "Call me after the wedding, Graham. We'll sort it out then." The Holloways hosted the engagement party at their home in Aurora. Not the cottage, the primary residence, a stone front house with a circular driveway and landscaping that looked like it had its own staff, because it did. The invitation came by text from Megan 4 days before the event. Not a call, not a card. A text message with an address and a time, and the words casual cocktail. Janet pressed her best blouse and spent 20 minutes choosing earrings. We drove an hour and 15 minutes south on the 400. Megan's mother Diane greeted us at the door. She was holding a glass of white wine and wearing the kind of smile that says I'm being generous with my attention. She introduced us to two couples in the foyer and got Janet's name wrong. This is Jenny, Kyle's mother. Janet didn't correct her. Our seats at dinner were at the far end of a long table, near the door to the garage. I could hear the compressor cycling every few minutes. During the toasts, Megan's father spoke for 10 minutes about the Holloway family, about Megan's accomplishments, about the future they were building. He mentioned Kyle warmly, briefly. He did not mention us at all. Kyle stood to speak at the end. He thanked Megan's parents. He thanked his friends. He thanked two of his university professors who were apparently in attendance, which I hadn't known. Then at the end, like a line added at the last revision, and of course Mom and Dad, thanks for making the drive. Thanks for making the drive. Like we were guests from out of town at a conference dinner. I looked at Janet. She had the smile on, the composed, careful one that I'd seen her use 1,000 times with difficult parents at the school when they came in angry, and she had to hold the room steady. The one that cost her everything and showed nothing. On the drive home, neither of us turned on the radio. Somewhere past Barry, Janet said, "He used to call me every Sunday." I know. When did that stop? I didn't answer. I knew exactly when it stopped. It stopped 3 months after Megan moved in. 6 weeks before the wedding, Kyle called on a Tuesday night. His voice had that particular tightness I recognized from every time something had gone sideways, and he needed me to make it straight. "Dad, the electrical contractor for the venue dropped out. Something about their insurance lapsing. The venue's saying they can't guarantee the lighting setup for the reception unless we get someone certified to sign off and rewire the temporary panel by Thursday. He was asking me to mobilize a crew in 48 hours for a job that normally takes a week to schedule. Don't mention it to Megan," he added. I called a former apprentice of mine, Dave Whitfield, who owed me nothing but showed up anyway. Because that's how it works in the trades when you've spent 34 years being someone people can count on. Dave brought 2 journeymen. They worked overnight Wednesday into Thursday. The panel was rewired, inspected, and signed off by noon. No invoice, no announcement. I didn't tell Janet, I didn't tell anyone. 2 weeks later, Kyle called again, different tone. "Dad, Megan found out about the electrical work." "Found out what?" "That I fixed a problem you asked me to fix. She says you went behind her back. She says it feels like you're inserting yourself into the wedding to make yourself important." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment and looked at the ceiling. "Kyle, you called me." "I know, Dad, I know. But she feels like you're overstepping. Can you just keep some distance until after the ceremony, please?" I heard the script in his voice, the careful, rehearsed evenness of a man repeating words that belong to someone else. "All right," I said. "I'll keep my distance." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. Janet was reading in the next room. She didn't ask. I didn't explain. "Hank Beaulieu called that evening. Just checking in," he said. He'd heard the wedding was coming up. "You sound tired, Graham." "Ask me after the wedding, Hank. You said that before." "I know." The rehearsal dinner was 45 people at a restaurant in Barrie that the Holloways had chosen without consulting us. Private room, white tablecloths, a projector screen at the far end running a slideshow. I counted the photos, 19. Megan at her university convocation, Megan and Kyle at a resort in BC, Megan with her sister at someone's bridal shower, Kyle and Megan's father at a Leafs game, which I hadn't known about either. Photos of the Holloway cottage, the Holloway Christmas, the Holloway dog. Not one photo of Janet, not one of me, not one of Kyle before Megan entered his life. Janet sat beside me and watched all 19 slides, with the same steady expression she uses when she's holding something too heavy to set down in public. Afterward, she excused herself to the washroom. She was gone for 12 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were slightly red, and she sat down without a word. Kyle stood to speak. He thanked his groomsmen. He thanked the Holloways. He thanked the venue. Then, near the end, like a footnote discovered at the last moment, "And yeah, Mom and Dad, love you guys. Thanks for being here." I stood when he finished, crossed the room and shook his hand. Pulled him close. "I love you, I always will, but there's going to come a point where you have to decide what kind of man you are, not for me, not for Megan, for yourself." He looked confused. Across the room, Megan watched us with an expression I couldn't read. Not concern. Something more calculating. On the way back to the hotel, Maureen called from Kelowna. She'd heard from a mutual friend of Kyle's. Graham, one of Megan's bridesmaids, told Kyle's friend that Megan is planning to deal with the Janet situation at the reception. Those were her words, the Janet situation. I stared at the highway. I didn't sleep that night. Saturday morning. The hotel room smelled like the iron and the tea Janet had made at 6, because neither of us slept past 5:30. I was fixing my tie in the bathroom mirror when Janet appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a navy blue dress she'd driven to 3 different shops in Aurelia and Barrie to find. She'd tried it on twice at home before buying it because she wanted to be sure it was right. Not too much, not too little. Appropriate. That was the word she kept using. She wanted to be appropriate. She looked at herself in the mirror beside me. Do I look all right? 32 years. The same question before every school concert, every holiday, every moment that mattered. I set down the tie and turned to face her. I reached over and straightened the small brooch she'd pinned near her collar, the one that belonged to her mother. You look like the woman I bid $60 on salad bowls for. You always have. She smiled. Then it faded. Promise me today will be all right, Graham. I looked at her. At the care she'd put into this morning, this dress, this effort to be exactly what the situation required of her. I promise we'll handle whatever comes together. It wasn't what she asked. She knew it. She nodded anyway. Before we left, I picked up my phone and sent a text to Hank Beaulieu. If I call you today, pick up. His reply came in 30 seconds, always. The venue was the Delta Hotel on Bayfield Street. When we pulled into the lot, I saw Megan near the entrance in her gown, speaking to her mother. She spotted us. She didn't wave. She looked at Janet, the way you look at an item on your to-do list that you've been meaning to cross off. 300 people fill a ballroom with a particular kind of weight. It's not just noise, it's witness. The room was done in ivory and silver, round tables with centerpieces that cost more than our monthly hydro bill. A string ensemble near the head table playing something classical I didn't recognize. Our table was number 9, near the service corridor. I could hear the kitchen clatter through the door every time a server went through. I pulled out Janet's chair. Maureen had flown in from Kelowna and was already seated beside us. She squeezed my arm without a word. I looked at the seating chart. Kyle and Megan's sweetheart table was at the far end, flanked by the Holloways, and a wall of floral arrangements that probably cost what I charged for a full residential Faulkner upgrade. Between us and them, 7 tables, 300 people, and a geometry that communicated everything without saying a single word. The ceremony was short, traditional. Kyle looked nervous and happy in the way grooms do. He glanced back once during the processional, one look toward our table. Then he turned forward, and that was it. At the cocktail hour, a woman at our table asked Janet what she did. Janet said she'd been a school librarian for 26 years. Oh, the woman said. How nice. Then she turned to speak to someone else. Janet reached for my hand under the table and held it. I sat there in my good suit at table 9 beside the kitchen corridor and thought, this is what we have been reduced to in our own son's life. But I was wrong. We hadn't been reduced. We had been positioned, and Megan wasn't finished. The reception moved through toasts and dinner in the usual order. Megan made her rounds table by table, touching shoulders, receiving compliments, managing the room like a campaign event. She reached our table last. She didn't stop. She slowed, glanced past Janet toward Maureen, gave a generic smile at nobody in particular, and moved on. Then Megan Holloway appeared at Janet's elbow. Glass of champagne, country club warmth. Janet dear, you look lovely. That dress is very practical. Practical. Not beautiful, not elegant, practical, like something chosen by someone who didn't know the difference. Thank you, Janet said. She said it the way she always does. Open, unguarded, because that's who she is. I set down my fork. Maureen leaned toward me. Graham, we can leave after dinner. We stay, I said. Across the room, Kyle was laughing with one of his groomsmen, relaxed, at ease. I watched him and tried to find the 22-year-old who used to call me from job sites, just to say he'd learned something that day. Then Megan broke from a group near the head table. She walked toward us with purpose. Not the social glide she'd been using all evening. This was direct. She pulled out the empty chair across from Janet and sat. The expression on her face was not a smile. It was a conclusion. Janet, I think we should clear the air about a few things. Janet set down her water glass. Of course, Megan, whatever you need. What followed was a list, delivered evenly, without emotion, which made it worse. Megan said Janet had been overstepping when Graham arranged the electrical work. She said it as though Janet had been involved. She said Janet had been creating emotional pressure on Kyle, making him feel obligated to call and visit when he had a business to run. She said Janet had been making comments to people at the rehearsal dinner that were unflattering about Megan. Janet's face went very still. Megan, I'm not finished. The table beside us had gone quiet. I just need us to be clear, Megan continued, about what this relationship is going forward. Kyle and I are building a life, and that means boundaries, real ones. Janet nodded slowly. I understand. I'm sorry if I've ever. She was apologizing again. Apologizing for things she hadn't done. The way she'd been conditioned by 2 years of small corrections and careful silences to do automatically, reflexively, the way you flinch before someone even raises their hand. I put my hand flat on the table. Megan, that isn't what happened with the electrical contractor. Kyle called me. She turned sharp. I'm speaking to Janet. The table next to us had definitely stopped talking. Across the room, 15 feet back, standing near the bar with a glass halfway to his mouth, Kyle was watching. He had heard. He had seen. He did not move toward us. I looked at my son across 40 feet of hardwood and white linen and chandelier light, and I did not recognize him. Janet began to stand. Graceful, quiet, the way she does everything. Megan, maybe this is better saved for another. No. Megan rose with her. Her voice climbed one register. Not shouting, but carrying now. 2 tables, 3. We do this now. I am done having this pushed off. She turned slightly toward the room, as if summoning it as audience. I know you've been telling people things about me. I know what you've been doing. You've been trying to undermine me since the day Kyle brought me home, and I am done pretending. Janet's voice was barely audible. That isn't true. Don't tell me what's true. Megan reached for the glass of red wine on the table. She picked it up with her left hand, deliberate, and threw it directly into Janet's face. Not a splash, not a spill. A full, aimed throw from 2 feet away. The wine hit Janet across the forehead, the eyes, the nose, and ran down the front of the navy blue dress she had driven to 3 stores to find. The dress she had tried on twice because she wanted to be right. The string ensemble stopped. 300 people went from noise to silence in approximately 1 second. Then Megan straightened, looked at Janet standing there with red wine dripping from her chin onto her mother's brooch, and her voice carried clean and hard across that silent ballroom. Get out. Nobody wants you here, Janet. This is our day, not yours. You don't belong here. Kyle was still standing at the bar. He set his glass down on the counter. He looked at his mother, at the wine on her face, at Megan standing there like a sentence had been passed, and he said nothing. Not one word. Maureen was already on her feet. I put my hand on her shoulder. Maureen, sit down. I stood up. The room was holding its breath. 300 people trying to decide whether to look or look away, and most of them choosing wrong. I walked around to Janet's side of the table. I took the white cloth napkin from beside her plate. I held it gently against her face and wiped the wine from her forehead, her cheeks, her chin. Not because there was anything to fix. Because my wife had just been humiliated in front of 300 people, and she deserved at least one moment of being tended to before anything else. She stood there and let me. Her hands were shaking. I folded the napkin and set it on the table. I unclipped the brooch from her collar, wiped it carefully with my thumb, and pinned it back. I straightened her shoulders with both hands, the way I'd done in the hotel room that morning. Then I buttoned my jacket, turned, and looked at the room. Not at Megan. Not at Megan Holloway. I looked at the room itself. The tables, the faces, the people who had just watched what they watched and would carry it for the rest of their lives. I found Kyle across the floor. He was looking at his shoes. I waited until he looked up. We'll talk later, son. 4 words. No anger. No trembling. Just the weight of something being settled. I offered Janet my arm. She took it. We walked out. Near the back of the room, past table 4, an older man in a gray suit caught my eye. He gave me a single slow nod, the kind that means I saw it, all of it. I nodded back. Outside, the October air was cold and the parking lot was quiet, and my wife was shaking against my arm, and I held on to her and did not say a word until she was ready. Maureen found us by the car 10 minutes later. She didn't ask anything. She just stood there in the autumn night in her good shoes on the asphalt and kept Janet company while I sat on the hood and looked at the sky over Barry. Janet was the first one to speak. Why didn't he? She stopped. Started again. Kyle. Why didn't he say anything? Nobody answered her. There was no answer that would help. I opened the passenger door. Let's get you inside. In the car, Maureen sat in the back. Nobody spoke. The hotel was 12 minutes away, and I drove the whole stretch without the radio. Halfway there, Janet reached over and put her hand on mine. I don't want to lose him, Graham. I know. Promise me we won't lose him. I kept my eyes on the road. We're not going to lose Kyle, but we're going to have to decide what we're willing to accept to keep him. And I'll tell you right now, Janet, it's not this. It can't be this. She was quiet. Then she nodded once and turned to the window. At the hotel, after Maureen had gone to her room and Janet had gotten into bed, I sat in the chair by the window with my phone. The lights of Bayfield Street were ordinary and indifferent, and that felt right. I called Hank Beaulieu. He picked up on the first ring. Graham, I'm sitting in the parking lot behind the Delta. I was at the reception. I saw everything. I closed my eyes. What do you need from me, Hank? That's my question to you. There are things your children don't know about you. Not because you hide them, but because they never asked. Hank Beaulieu and I apprenticed together in 1991 at an electrical shop in Aurelia. He went into project management, then development. Over 30 years, he'd built Beaulieu and Associates into one of the most respected regional development firms in Simcoe County. His company was currently leading the Lakeview Terrace project, a mixed-use waterfront development in Barrie, 160,000 square feet, the largest new build the city had approved in a decade. They were in the final stages of selecting project partners and consultants. 4 months ago, Kyle had submitted a proposal for planning and design coordination on Lakeview Terrace. He'd called me, excited. His biggest pitch, his shot at legitimacy. He didn't know Hank was on the selection committee. He'd never asked what Hank did for a living. He'd never thought to ask. I hadn't told him. There was never a reason to. Not yet. In the parking lot that night, Hank and I talked for 20 minutes. He told me Kyle's technical work had impressed the committee, but the final round involved professional vetting. Character, reliability, network. The committee wanted to know who they were working with behind the portfolio. What do you want me to do, Graham? I thought about Janet's face, the wine running down her chin. Kyle at the bar, glass in hand, watching, saying nothing. I don't want you to hurt him, I said. I just need you to stop covering for him the way I always have. Let whatever's going to happen happen on its own. Hank was quiet for a moment. Understood. Kyle called at 11:40 that night. I took it in the bathroom with the door closed. Dad. His voice had the careful flatness of a man who'd rehearsed his opening line. I think we should talk about tonight. All right, I'm listening. Megan was under a lot of pressure. The whole day was overwhelming for her. She didn't mean it the way it came across. She's going to call Mom tomorrow and apologize. I didn't say anything. Dad, she wants to fix this. Kyle, your wife threw a glass of wine in your mother's face in front of 300 people, and you stood at the bar and watched. The pause that followed told me I'd landed exactly where I needed to. I know, he said. Quiet. I need you to understand that before we talk about Megan's stress levels or her intentions. I need you to sit with what you did and what you didn't do tonight. That's where this starts. That's not fair. It's very fair. Call me when you're ready to talk about that part. Not before. I ended the call and sat on the cold edge of the hotel bathtub for a long time. Through the door, I could hear Janet's breathing settle into sleep. On the other side of town, I found out later, Megan had taken Kyle's phone from his hand the second the call ended. She scrolled through the screen, nodded once, set it face down. She wasn't worried. She'd seen this pattern before. Graham Faulkner would cool down, he always did. She had no reason yet to think this time was any different. Sunday morning, Kyle called at 8, then 9:15, then 9:50. I let all three go to voicemail. Janet's phone rang just after 10. She was sitting across from me at the small hotel table with her tea. She looked at the screen, Megan. Then she looked at me. Your call, I said. She set the phone face down on the table and wrapped both hands around her cup. 15 minutes later, a text from Kyle. Dad, Megan is sorry. She wants to talk. We all need to talk, please. I typed back. When you're ready to talk about what happened, not explain Megan, but talk about what happened, call me. No response for 5 hours. Maureen joined us for breakfast at a diner on Dunlop Street. Eggs, coffee, a window booth looking out at an ordinary Sunday morning. Dog walkers, a woman pushing a stroller, leaves blowing across the sidewalk. The world entirely unaware that anything had ended or begun. How are you actually doing? Maureen asked. Not great, I said. But clearer than I expected. She nodded. That was enough. Back at the hotel, I checked my email. There was a message from Hank sent that morning at 7. The Lakeview Terrace Selection Committee was meeting Monday. Kyle's firm was still on the short list. The committee had questions about professional references and network stability. Hank would be present. He hadn't asked me what to do. He'd simply told me the facts. I read it twice, closed my phone, looked out at the Sunday afternoon arriving over Barry's rooftops. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the phone to fix something. I let it sit. I let it breathe. They showed up Monday morning without calling. I heard the car from the kitchen. Janet was at the counter. She looked at me. I dried my hands. Kyle had his jaw set. Megan was in pressed slacks and a blazer, composed, deliberate. She dressed for this the way you dress for a business meeting, where you expect the outcome to go your way. We sat in the living room. No coffee offered. That was new. Megan folded her hands in her lap. Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner, I owe you an apology for my behavior on Saturday. I'm sorry if what I did caused pain. Sorry if… Megan, I said, a conditional apology isn't one. Sorry if it hurt is not the same as I was wrong. She held my gaze. I'm not sure what more you want me to say. I'll be specific. You threw a glass of wine in my wife's face in front of 300 people. You told her nobody wanted her there. And your husband, my son, said nothing. What I want isn't for you to make me feel better about it. I want you to understand what those things actually were. Kyle started, Dad, this isn't your conversation right now, Kyle. Megan's composure cracked slightly. So what does this mean for us going forward? What are you planning to do? I looked at her. Steady. Nothing dramatic. What it means is that Janet and I have changed what we're available for. Those changes won't be negotiated in a Monday morning living room. You'll see what they look like over time. She searched my face for the leverage, the anger, the opening. There wasn't any. They left 20 minutes later. At the door, Megan glanced back at me. She wasn't sure anymore, and she knew that I knew it. Hank called Monday at 4. Committee met this afternoon. Kyle's technical submission was solid. Good instincts, clean presentation. Then they asked about professional network and character. The usual due diligence. What did you tell them? The truth. I told them, I've known Graham Faulkner for 33 years, and he is the most reliable person I've ever worked alongside in this industry. Then they asked if I had the same confidence in his son. I waited. I told them I hadn't worked directly with Kyle, and I didn't have enough first-hand knowledge to vouch for him personally. In development, that answer has a specific meaning. Not a lie, not a smear. Simply the absence of a recommendation from someone positioned to give one. Everyone in the room understood what that silence meant. They removed him from the short list, Hank said. I want you to know I didn't say a negative word about him. I know. And I want you to know I would have made a call on his behalf a week ago if you'd asked. I didn't ask. No, Hank said. You didn't. We were quiet for a moment. Are you all right, Graham? I'm figuring out what all right looks like from here. I looked out the window at Janet's garden, the last of the fall mums, holding on. I'm not sorry. That's new for me. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of what had not happened. I hadn't engineered anything. I hadn't plotted. I had simply stopped being the cushion that caught my son before he hit the ground. Kyle had always known I was there. He'd built his confidence on that foundation. Now he was going to have to find out what he was made of without it. That wasn't punishment. It was the most honest thing I had ever done for him. Kyle called Tuesday evening. Rehearsed flatness was gone. What was left sounded like my son. Dad, we got the letter from Lakeview Terrace. I heard. A long pause. Were you involved in that? I gave him the truth. I didn't make a call against you. I didn't say a word to anyone. What I did was not step in the way I normally would have. That's the same thing. No, it's not. But I understand why it feels that way. Silence. Then you always stepped in. My whole life. I know. So why now? I looked at the kitchen wall for a moment. Because your wife threw wine in your mother's face and you stood there. And I had to figure out what it meant that I was still going to show up and smooth things over. What that was teaching you. I paused. What it was teaching me. Kyle didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was lower. What do I do now, Dad? That's the first honest question you've asked me in 2 years. I meant it gently. I think he heard it that way. Figure out what kind of man you want to be. Not for me, not for Megan. For yourself. What you stand for and what you won't stand for. That answer has to be yours. And if I figure that out, are we okay? We're always going to love you. That doesn't change. But okay is a process, Kyle. It's not a switch you flip. All right, he said finally. It wasn't enough. It wasn't everything. But it was the first honest brick. Megan came alone on Thursday. I opened the door. She was in jeans and a jacket, none of Monday's armor. Just her and whatever she'd worked out on the drive. You sabotaged Kyle's contract, she said. No preamble. Because of what happened at the reception. That's retaliation. Come inside if you want to talk. I'll say it here, Megan. I didn't make a single call against your husband. I didn't contact anyone. What I stopped doing was advocating for him the way I always have. If you think about it clearly, you'll see the difference. You let him fail. I let him stand on his own. That's what parents are supposed to do eventually. You're punishing him for what I did. I'm done shielding him from consequences he's earned by the choices he's made, including the choice to stand at a bar and say nothing while his wife threw wine in his mother's face. She searched for the anger, for the flinch, for the gap she could use. If you don't support us, she said, you'll lose him. I looked at her for a long moment. Megan, I lost something I thought I had when I watched my son make his choice on Saturday night. Whatever comes next is built from here. That's up to Kyle and you, not me. I took a step back. You don't get to tell me what my relationship with my son costs. That's not how this works. I closed the door quietly. The week after was ordinary in the way things are ordinary after something irreversible. The coffee still brews, the mail still arrives, the garden still needs putting to bed for winter. But ordinary differently now, with new edges. Megan Holloway called on Wednesday. Janet took it. The message, delivered in the polished vocabulary of someone accustomed to managing situations over lunch, was that enough time had passed, feelings had been expressed, and wouldn't it be better for everyone, especially Kyle, if we could all move past this? Janet listened. Then she said something I will never forget. Diane, I don't need Graham to forgive anyone right now. What I need is for my daughter-in-law to understand, not perform understanding, but actually understand what she did. And I need my son to become the man I raised him to be. Neither of those things happens because we agree to be polite about it. There was a long silence. Then Diane thanked her and hung up. Janet set the phone on the counter and stood very still for a moment. Then she turned around, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she looked entirely at ease. Not hard, not guarded, just straight. The woman who had spent 2 years apologizing for existing had stopped. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. 3 weeks after the wedding, I heard through a contractor I'd worked with for years that Megan's interior staging business had gone quieter than usual. Nobody was refusing her. The phone just wasn't ringing the way it had. Referrals run on trust, and trust lives in the same community, where 300 people attended a wedding, and 300 people carried 300 memories. Someone asked Diane Holloway at a charity luncheon in Newmarket whether the stories about the reception were true. Diane said there had been a misunderstanding. The table went quiet in exactly the way tables go quiet when nobody believes the explanation, but nobody wants to say so. That was the sound of a reputation revising itself. I hadn't made a single call. Kyle emailed 10 days later. Subject line, can we meet? Just us. We met at a bench by the waterfront in Barrie on a Thursday morning. Kyle was already there when I arrived, hands loosely clasped, watching the gray water of Kempenfelt Bay. I sat beside him. We didn't speak for a minute. I knew, he said. Before the wedding, I knew Megan had been building something against Mom. I saw it happening. I kept thinking it would level off. He looked at his hands. I wanted it to level off, so I let myself believe it would. That's not the same as not knowing. No, I said. It's not. The water moved against the shore. Somewhere behind us, a kid was tossing bread to the gulls. Can you forgive me? I thought about it. Actually thought about it instead of reaching for the answer a father is supposed to give. I love you. That doesn't have an off switch. But forgiveness is something you earn through action over time, not through asking for it. I looked at him. I need to see who you are from here, not hear about it. He nodded. But Kyle, I'm not the one you need to be having this conversation with. He looked at me. Your mother is the one who got wine thrown in her face. Your mother is the one Megan humiliated. And every conversation about making things right has come to me, not to her. I held his gaze. She's the one you owe this to, not me. Something shifted in his expression, the kind of shift you see when someone realizes they've been solving the wrong problem. You're right, he said quietly. I've been avoiding it because it's harder. That's exactly why it matters. He called Janet that evening. I don't know everything they said. Janet took the call in the kitchen and I stayed in the living room. She was on the phone for over an hour. When she came out, her eyes were red, but she was smiling. Not the careful, composed smile she'd been wearing for 2 years. A real one. He cried, she said. My boy cried. I pulled her close and held on. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived for Janet. Megan's handwriting. Janet opened it at the kitchen table. She read it once, set it down, read it again. She handed it to me. One page, handwritten. This time Megan had used the word wrong. She said she had been wrong. She said what she had done was harmful and inexcusable. She did not say she understood why, which was honest at least. Understanding takes longer than a letter. Janet went to the small desk in the corner where she keeps her personal stationery, the cream kind with her initials pressed into the top, and she wrote back. She showed it to me before sealing it. Megan, I received your letter and I'm glad you wrote it. I won't pretend the right words come easily, so I'll say this. I carry no hatred towards you, but I won't pretend nothing happened. When you're ready to have a real conversation, not to be forgiven, but to actually understand what happened and why, I'm here for that. Take your time, Janet. No apology, no minimizing, no opening the door wider than the situation required. Is it too much? She asked. It's exactly right. She sealed it, walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and dropped it in. When she came back, she washed her hands at the kitchen sink and started making dinner like it was any other Thursday. But her posture was different, straighter, lighter. I want to pause here, because I know what some of you are thinking. Did I feel guilty? Did I wonder if I should have handled it differently? Yes, every day. You don't get to watch your kid struggle, even when the struggle is of his own making, without that weight sitting on you. But I've learned that guilt and responsibility are not the same thing, and that doing nothing harmful is not the same as doing nothing at all. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a position where keeping the peace and keeping your dignity were two different choices? Where you had to pick one? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it, because I think more of us have sat at that table, or stood in that room, or walked out of that building, than we ever admit out loud. Let me tell you how this ends. 6 months later, Kyle and I have breakfast every other Saturday. We rotate through a few diners between Barry and Aurelia, the kind with laminated menus and coffee in thick white mugs. We don't have an agenda. We talk about work, about the Leafs, about whatever is on his mind. Sometimes we sit in quiet for 10 minutes, and that's enough. But it's not just me anymore. Kyle drives up to the house every second Sunday and has tea with Janet. Just the two of them. He sits at the kitchen table where he used to do his homework and they talk. I don't know what about. I don't ask. That's their ground to rebuild, and they're rebuilding it. Kyle and Megan are in counseling. He mentions it without elaboration, and I don't press. What matters is he's showing up for something hard and staying in the room. Megan hasn't been to our house. That's the current boundary, and we've all agreed to it, without saying so out loud. His firm landed a smaller project 2 months ago, a restaurant renovation on Dunlop Street, earned entirely through his own contacts. He called to tell me when the contract came through. He sounded different, not just happy, earned. I sat across from him one Saturday morning at the diner on Bayfield, the one with the old photos of Barry on the walls from the 1950s. He'd been quiet through most of breakfast, not the managing kind of quiet. He set down his fork. Dad, that night at the reception, when you stood up and wiped the wine off Mom's face and walked her out without saying a word, he looked at me. I've replayed that 200 times. I waited. I thought I knew what kind of man I was. I had this whole idea. And then I watched you walk out of that room without making a scene, and I realized I had no idea what it actually cost to be that. He paused. I thought being a man meant holding your ground. Turns out it means knowing when walking out is the harder thing to do. I didn't say anything for a moment. Megan and I are still in counseling, he said. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I'm not going to be the man who stands at the bar anymore. I know, I said. He looked up. You know, I can see it. These mornings, I can see you working at it. He nodded. We paid the bill and walked out into the late spring morning. Two men who have a long way still to go, and enough honesty between them now to make the walk. In the trades, we say the connection is everything. You can run new wire, replace old fixtures, upgrade the whole panel, but if the connections aren't solid, none of it carries current. We're making new connections now. One Saturday at a time. If you've been listening to all of this, there's something I want to say before I let you go. If you recognized yourself somewhere in this story, maybe as someone who's absorbed too much for too long, someone who's been at the table near the kitchen door, someone whose child looked away at the wrong moment, I want you to hear this. You are not required to make yourself smaller to keep someone comfortable, not even if that someone is your child, not even if the room is full of 300 people watching to see what you'll do. Walking out is not giving up. Setting a boundary is not withdrawing love. And letting your child feel the weight of their own choices is not cruelty. It's the most honest form of love I know. My name is Graham Faulkner. I am still Kyle's father. We have breakfast on Saturday mornings, and Janet has tea with her son on Sundays. Carol's mums are coming back. Hank and I have coffee once a month at the same place we've gone for 15 years. The Lakeview project broke ground last month. I drove past the site and thought about connections the way I always do, and somewhere out there, a son is doing the harder work of becoming the man he should have been a year ago. And a mother is no longer apologizing for being in the room. Some connections you rewire. Some you just make sure you don't cut the ones that still carry current. If this story stayed with you, if it gave you permission to draw a line you've been afraid to draw, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done? There are more stories in the description. I'll see you in the next one.